All right, let's jump right into this explainer and untangle the complex, multi-generational, and honestly, pretty surprising origin story of the world's most prestigious sports car manufacturer. Because, when we think of Porsche today, our minds immediately go straight to those sleek silhouettes, the iconic roar of a flat-six engine, and this unbroken lineage of high-octane racing supremacy. But as we're about to see, the true story of how this brand actually rose from the ashes of history is a whole lot more complicated and way more fascinating than you might expect.
Now here's a detail that completely shatters our modern expectations. Long before those roaring combustion engines became the absolute signature of the brand, the Porsche DNA was entirely 100% electric. Crazy, right? To understand exactly how that happened, we've got to rewind the clock.
Section 1. Sparks of Genius.
We are going all the way back to the end of the 19th century to meet young Ferdinand Porsche. This guy was a true pioneer of electromobility, literally from day one. At age 13 back in 1888, he's already wiring up electric doorbells in his parents' house in Bohemia. By 16, he's adding full electric lighting, and this wasn't just some passing teenage hobby. It was the foundation of his entire career. Fast forward 1898, he designs the Eggerlohner C2 Phaeton, a pure electric vehicle. And then, at the 1900 Paris World Exposition, he completely stuns the automotive world with a vehicle propelled by electric wheel hub motors. He essentially created the world's first four-wheel drive car right then and there.
Get this, though. A full century before modern hybrids hit our roads, Ferdinand had already solved the dreaded issue of short battery range. The 1901 Lohner Porsche Mixed used a gas engine, but not to turn the wheels directly. Nope, it generated electricity for those wheel hubs. It was an absolute masterpiece of early engineering. Ultimately, though, the whole thing stalled out because of one massive hurdle. The batteries and motors made the car weigh almost 2 tons. The charging infrastructure literally just wasn't there yet to support something so heavy.
Moving on to Section 2. The Engineering Office.
So let's fast forward a few decades. Ferdinand has this highly successful career designing aircraft engines and racing cars for big names like Austro-Daimler and Mercedes-Benz, but he finally decides it's time to strike out on his own. Now, it is super important to understand that when the Porsche company was officially founded in April 1931, right smack in the middle of the global economic crisis, by the way, they didn't actually build Porsches. Together with his son-in-law Anton Pietsch and businessman Adolf Rosenberger, Ferdinand opened an engineering consulting firm in Stuttgart. They were taking on development work for everything from wind turbines to vehicle concepts for other brands like Wanderer and Zündapp.
And that consulting work? Well, it led to Ferdinand's most famous early design. In 1934, the German government commissioned the office to create the Type 60, a car for the masses. Today, we know it as the legendary Volkswagen Beetle. And what's just incredible to me is that the very first prototypes for this global icon were built right in the garage of Ferdinand's Stuttgart villa. His son, Ferry Porsche, was actually put in charge of overseeing those initial test drives right out of their own driveway.
Which brings us to Section 3. War, relocation, and confinement.
As we move into the 1940s, the trajectory of the Porsche family and the engineering office is irrevocably altered by the Second World War. Looking objectively at the historical record, the company's focus entirely shifted during this era. Ferdinand Porsche, who was a member of the Nazi Party and the SS, began designing military equipment for the German government. We're talking amphibious vehicles like the Schwimmwagen, the Kielwagen, and even heavy tank prototypes like the Elephant. During this period, thousands of forced laborers were brought to work at the Porsche facilities. Historians note that these workers were required to wear the letter P on their clothing, and that P stood for Poland, not Porsche.
Looking at this timeline, you can clearly see the absolute upheaval the company went through. By 1944, they had to escape the heavy bombings in Stuttgart, so they relocated operations to a remote, tiny Austrian town called Gmünd. Once the war ended, British forces took over the main Volkswagen factory. And then, in December 1945, Ferdinand Porsche was arrested by French authorities for war crimes. He was held without trial for a grueling 20 months. This left his son, Ferry, to somehow steer a completely fractured company to its absolute darkest days.
So you're probably asking yourself the same thing I did. How on earth do you build a luxury sports car company out of an old Austrian sawmill in 1948? Because with Ferdinand in a French prison, Ferry Porsche literally had to keep the lights on by producing whatever people needed. We're talking water-powered generators, winches, even tractors. But Ferry, he had a much bigger dream.
Section 4. The first Porsche.
Out of all that post-war chaos,
The true Porsche automotive brand that we recognize today was finally born. And I absolutely love this quote from Ferry. He said, "I decided to build my own car because I could not find an existing one that I wanted to buy." It so perfectly captures him stepping entirely out of his father's shadow. He was done designing cars for other people. He wanted a sports car for himself. And that singular drive led to the creation of the aluminum-bodied 356 #1 Roadster, the very first car ever to bear the Porsche name.
Now, parts were incredibly scarce in post-war Europe, so Ferry had to get super resourceful. He actually relied heavily on his father's VW Beetle designs to get the 356 off the ground. Those early 356s used Volkswagen engine cases, transmissions, suspension parts, you name it. It's just a fantastic reminder for us that true innovation doesn't always mean having unlimited resources. Often, it literally means starting from scratch with whatever materials you happen to have lying around.
All right, Section 5. Sealing the legend. By 1950, things had stabilized enough for the company to move back to Stuttgart-Zuffenhausen. They partnered with Reuter Carrosserie to kick off serial production of steel-bodied 356s. But getting it perfectly right wasn't easy. Ferdinand Porsche, who is now released from prison, comes out to inspect the very first Zuffenhausen-built 356 body in the factory yard. The story goes that he silently circled the car several times, sat down on a stool, stared at the front hood, and just grumbled, "The car needs to go back into the workshop. The body's wrong, it's not symmetrical." That famously perfectionist critique right there, that set the standard for Porsche engineering forever.
As the cars got better, they desperately needed a brand identity. And the birth of the legendary Porsche crest is such a great many story. It actually took a push from Max Hoffman, this brilliant American car importer who knew U.S. buyers wanted a European quality seal on the hood. So during a business dinner in New York in 1952, Ferry Porsche literally sketched out the initial idea on a napkin. When he got back to Germany, designer Franz Xaver Reimspies perfected that quick sketch into the iconic crest we all know today.
And if you've ever wondered why there's a rearing horse right in the middle of a sports car logo, it all goes back to their hometown. They placed the horse from Stuttgart City Seal in the center to honor their roots. The name Stuttgart itself actually comes from a 10th century word meaning a stud farm for horse breeding. Makes total sense, right? That horse perfectly symbolizes the power, agility, and pure elegance of what they were building.
But here's something wild. We came incredibly close to never having a 911. In 1963, Ferry's son, F.A. Porsche, designed this rear-engined, air-cooled six-cylinder masterpiece to replace the 356. It was the car that would absolutely secure the company's future. But they originally called it the 901. It was only because the French automaker Peugeot protested, claiming they owned the trademark on all three-digit car names with a zero in the middle, that Porsche had to scramble. A literal last-minute adjustment to change that 0 to a 1, and boom, the 911 is born.
And as the 911 evolved, its legendary status just exploded. Check out this number, 1,525. That's exactly how many units of the 911 Carrera RS 2.7 they ended up building in 1972. Porsche originally only planned a tiny homologation run of just 500 cars, so they could legally take it racing. But customers were absolutely desperate to get their hands on that high-performance model and its iconic ducktail rear spoiler. The demand was so insane, they were forced to triple their production.
So, bringing it all together, comparing 1898 to 2019 really proves that the Porsche story has come completely full circle. We started with Ferdinand's early Egger Launer Phaeton, maxing out at a whole 25 kilometers per hour, and today we have the Porsche Taycan, utilizing insane 800-volt electric architecture that they perfected on the track at Le Mans. The electric powertrain isn't just some recent trend Porsche jumped on, it has literally been embedded deep in the company's DNA from day one. Which really leaves us with one final thought as we wrap up this explainer. As we sit here watching Porsche push the absolute boundaries of EV technology, rolling out hybrid performance in the 911, and developing mind-bending hypercars today, just how far will Ferdinand's teenage obsession with electricity take this legendary brand tomorrow? Thanks for hanging out with me to dig into the archives, and I'll catch you next time.